The Newsagents USA.
Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say,
That was Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, who received a rousing reception of 10,000 or so people in Atlanta, in Georgia, a battleground state. She has turned this into a vibes campaign. The whole language of how she is on the stump has changed.
It's also clever. Because in the years that Donald Trump has been in politics, the one thing you know is he has a problem with powerful women. Nancy Pelosi couldn't stand her, Hillary Clinton the same. But Kamala Harris is taking the fight to him on her terms and getting all the attention. And there is nothing he hates more than that. Welcome to Newsagents USA. It's John.
It's Emily. And if you start to hear what the Democratic campaign is doing now, there is one word that you will keep coming across, and it is weird. It was a word I used, bizarrely, on the podcast last week to describe some of J.D. Vance's cat lady language. And I didn't realise then that I was either setting a trend or becoming part of a trend or just picking up on a trend.
You were leading and others followed.
Exactly. Hillary Clinton used the same word. And Tim Walz, who is the Minnesota governor, is credited with being the person who has introduced this into the conversation. And essentially, it revolves around making people think of Donald Trump not as this scary, powerful, extraordinary, charismatic, populist character, but as the weird guy who talks about electrocuting sharks, who talks about Hulk Hogan, who talks about
Hannibal
Lecter as if he's a real person. And what Kamala Harris is doing on the campaign trail is making something seem very odd about the person she's standing against. And she's doing it essentially by emasculating him. She's laughing, she's joking, she's throwing her head back. She's doing all the things that you've actually, frankly, never, ever seen Trump do in 8 years on the campaign stump.
Look, we are in the midst of the Olympic Games at the moment. And if we're to use an Olympic Games metaphor, in 2019, Kamala Harris, when she went for the Democratic nomination of president, did a belly flop off the high board and got absolutely nowhere. And it was a hopeless campaign. 5 years on, she looks a very different proposition.
Yeah.
She looks much more confident. She's reinventing herself. Now, whether any of this manifests itself in greater support for her in swing states, among minorities, among college-educated women, we haven't yet got the detailed polling data to say that this has been a game changer. But it's feeling like it. And in terms of the Democratic Party mood, It has been transformed. Given where they were when Joe Biden was still the candidate and everyone is holding their hands in despair, saying, what on earth do we do now?
What I think Kamala Harris has done is recognise that in the days of Hillary Clinton, it was about going to, go to my website.org, right? She doesn't want to be the person that sends her crowd to a website. She wants to be the person that re-injects optimism and a feel-good factor. We all remember going to those rallies in 2016. Bernie Sanders had people going around the block. Donald Trump had people going around the block. You were energised. You were excited. You wanted to be part of that crowd. And I think that's what she's trying to do now. And in a way, it's an easy battle for her because Donald Trump's whole shtick has been America's going to hell in a handcart. Be very afraid. Be very fearful. It's all going wrong. It's gloomy. It's dark. Can you believe the forces of evil that are coming for you? And all she has to do is say, actually, America's still a really fun place.
I think what's interesting about it, Hillary Clinton was, aside from the email server, the misogyny, all of which is true, she was an awful candidate in that she decided that her path was just to be incredibly serious and earnest. And of course, being president of the United States is incredibly serious and earnest
and
job.
being the first woman.
And
so she probably thought
and she had to overcompensate. what Kamala Harris has decided to do, and, that clip we played in the introduction to the show, I think shows that she's got a sense of humour and that she's prepared to kind of have us laugh at Donald Trump. And I think the Trump campaign at the moment have not worked out what it is they want to do about her. Is it just to insult her and say, she's nuts, she's a San Francisco lawyer, she's liberal, she's nuts, which is what they seem to be saying again and again and again, which I don't think is very effective. They're trying to rechristen her now the border czar, and there is a new Trump ad that has just landed where they try to talk about her as the person who was solely responsible for the southern border, and she's flunked it. I mean, she was never the border czar. She was never given that job. She was asked to look at wider issues around immigration and what you could do to tackle it. But that seems to be it. And so I think that the Trump campaign at the moment, having come away from Milwaukee thinking, we have got this in the bag and we are winning so big, they're now thinking, hell, we've got a fight on our hands. How do we measure up to it?
Yeah, and a lot has been made of the fact that, the Democrats left it very late in the race to change it up. Why wasn't Kamala Harris, if it was going to be her, given more time, given a longer sort of runway? But actually, the advantage is that Donald Trump had already sewn himself to his VP, J.D. Vance. And he is somebody that the American people, and indeed, the rest of the world, is just beginning to get to know. And last week, we played you his cat lady, the childless cat lady quote. And actually, what has resurfaced then is not just him sort of doubling down on this, but going back further to create an absolute ideology around it. This is just a clip from 2020 when he was speaking on a Christian podcast after his Hillbilly Elegy memoir had come out, explaining why he thinks it's important for people to have children.
The way that it makes them more patient, the way that it makes them more thoughtful and empathetic, it's just having kids actually makes you a better person. I believe this very deeply.
So it's not, as you said, it's not, it made me feel a better person, which is absolutely fine, but it's kind of, you should do it because it will make you a better person. Now, look, you can argue the rights and wrongs of whether being a parent, makes you feel that you've kind of given more back to the world or whatever. Now, you can argue that if he feels better about being, a parent, that's absolutely fine. We'll leave him to that. And there are millions that would agree with him and millions that would probably disagree with him. But ultimately, if you are in favour of procreation, don't set yourself up against IVF. Don't stop other people from using IVF to get pregnant, to have kids, because he does. And also, don't make this part of what feels like a nationalism thing, which is he and Orban in Hungary share the same sort of worldview, which is if we're not having American children, then America will be taken over by immigrants. And somehow that slightly darker tone underpins, I think, a lot of the ideology that is starting to coming through.
So it's the ideology of the great replacement theory. And as you say, I go back to Charlottesville and the controversial demonstration by white supremacists and they were chanting, Jews will not replace us. The idea that
this
the
Jews
were trying to supplant.
Trump's first year.
Yeah, and when Trump said there were good people on both sides of the debate, which caused Donald Trump a huge amount of trouble. Donald Trump always insists he was misrepresented and misquoted in his comments. It's the idea that there are these people out there that, America is losing its whiteness and that all these people that are coming in from the border are being imported by Democrats because Democrats identify that as their only way of winning elections. And so the country will become Latino in only a matter of time because of it. And, that is where J.D. Vance is. My guess is that Donald Trump and his campaign team, who are serious professionals, are getting spooked by some of what Vance has said, some of the messaging that he's coming up with. And I bet you're going to hear an awful lot less of childless cat ladies from J.D. Vance now. And the other thing you're going to hear a lot less of is this Project 25, which we've talked about on the podcast before, which is this kind of radical agenda advanced by the Heritage Society in Washington, D.C., very right wing, talking about giving the president even greater powers, no longer 3 co-equal branches of government, civil servants pledging oaths of loyalty to the president of the United States. The head of Project 25 has just resigned. Donald Trump is saying, I don't know anything about them, even though it's all staffed by former Trump staffers. I think that Donald Trump is recognising that his campaign has gone too far in one direction and needs to tack back. And I think that, J.D. Vance is part of that and Project 25 is the other part of that.
Yeah. And do you think, have you shifted from where we ended this last week, which was he could replace him? I mean, talking about great replacement theories.
I think that if things got really bad in the polls, Donald Trump is an assiduous reader of opinion polls. There'll be a lot of private polling work going on now over, in particular, the 6 key kind of swing states, if you like, that would be in play in November. I still think it's possible that if he thinks that J.D. Vance is a drag on the ticket, and J.D. Vance was not Donald Trump's first instinct, I don't believe. I think his first instinct was to go for Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor. But apparently Don Jr. and Eric Trump were saying, you've got to get J.D. Vance. He's your natural heir.
And Peter Thiel.
Who
is his billionaire backer.
Yeah. Go for J.D. Vance. And I think that maybe they are ruining it now because I think that J.D. Vance has become a lightning conductor. And Donald Trump doesn't want all this attention on his VP pick.
I think if you think you're going to win, you say the people love this, we'll double up, more of the same. As soon as you think there's a chance that you might not win, then you start to think, have I done this strategically? Where's my woman? Where's my VP that can take me into battles about Roe v. Wade, battles about abortion? Because the female vote in the US is always underestimated. And most of the elections that have been won by Democrats in the last couple of years have been with the force of that change to abortion laws in the state. I mean, it has been extraordinary how much that has mattered, not just to Democrat women, but to women from every party.
Well, it's worth listening to this advert that the Democratic Party have put out, which is, of course, a parody, just so that you understand it, but you'll get it pretty quickly.
It's the average American, and they each have a line to say. And it's pretty frightening.
Us MAGA Republicans banned abortion, but that's just the start.
That's just the start.
If Trump gets elected, we want the government involved in all aspects of your sex life.
Way more involved.
Way more involved.
When you have sexual intercourse...
I think it was a clever ad. I mean, all done by men. I was on a panel recently and someone said, well, isn't Kamala Harris, a bloke asked this question, isn't Kamala Harris going to have a problem with blue-collar American men? And, and the reply was not as big a problem as Donald Trump's going to have with women. And I think that the ticket of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump is really problematic given the stance that they've taken on, child abortion, all the rest of it.
Yeah, IVF.
Yeah.
But you raise a good point, which is one that Bernie Sanders actually made, which is she has to now work really hard to get those swing states, blue-collar workers of the kind that, Trump won in 2016 and Biden from Scranton in Pennsylvania won in 2020. And we're going to talk after the break a little bit more about who her VP pick might be with an eye to that very question.
So we realised the other night that our daughter Anna had never seen Veep. And we started watching the first season of Veep, which is so good and is evergreen. And
she has to choose her ice cream flavour in that first episode, and she tries to choose it politically so that she doesn't come across as vanilla and she's not too exotic and she doesn't choose rum because that would suggest she's an alcoholic, isn't it, that one?
Exactly. But what we're seeing now playing out in America are the Veep stakes.
Yeah.
And a few weeks ago, people were saying, well, if Biden does stand down, it's going to be such a slaughter. No one will want to be the vice president on a ticket with Kamala Harris because it's all going to hell.
They all do.
They all do.
I know.
That's exactly it. They all do. And so we've got to go through some of the names of people who are going to be under consideration and whose names we're probably going to get to know in the next week or so, because she's probably got to do that quite soon.
I think they said before August the 7th.
Exactly. So she's got a week and a bit before she has to make her decision. And So I'll start the ball rolling with kind of some random names.
Yeah.
Josh Shapiro. Now, he is the governor of Pennsylvania. Why does he matter? Because Pennsylvania is a key northeast, Rust Belt, swing state.
Massive number of electoral votes.
Massive number of electoral
She
college
says,
votes.
try to find it.
And he is a good communicator. He is feisty. He is on the ball. And actually, if you listen to him with your eyes shut, you can almost believe that you're listening to Barack Obama. Have a listen to this.
You could not have a clearer contrast in this race. You could not have a clearer contrast between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And let me tell you something. He's pretty afraid. Y'all see, he's backing out of...
It's unbelievable. He's a white guy, Jewish guy, who absolutely sounds like he could be Barack Obama, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, look, he has a lot of pluses. He represents that kind of key sort of geographical part of America where Kamala Harris has got to do well. And, as a kind of Californian lawyer, may not be her natural territory. So he is certainly one of those people to watch. Come on, who are you watching?
Wait a sec. So I think just in terms of why we're saying that Pennsylvania is a key swing state, there are 19 votes, right? So when we say key, we mean very marginal, but also delivers a lot of electoral college votes. So there are
where
19
the target
in Pennsylvania.
is 270.
Exactly. And the other ones we're looking out for, Michigan, I mean, the line is you cannot find a path to the presidency without winning Michigan, which is another 15 electoral votes. Okay, so the person that I've sort of been introduced to in the last week is Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who is this very kind of folksy, chatty, relaxed, kind of older guy, grey, white hair. And when I think he was the first person, as I mentioned before, he was the first person to introduce this idea of the Trump campaign being weird. And he just says it as if it's kind of occurred to him. He's a teacher, so he kind of knows what he's doing. He knows how to reach the kids. He knows how to get his message through. And when he describes Trump being weird, he makes this very careful distinction, which is, I'm not saying his supporters are weird at all. I'm saying his supporters are members of my family, are members of my community, are my neighbours, the people who go to the rallies. I'm saying they're normal folk. But the guy in the centre is weird. And he is the person, and I think we can play this clip, who first made me think about this question of whether we have ever seen Donald Trump laugh.
On this is, have you ever seen the guy laugh? That seems very weird to me that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else. It is simply what we're observing.
Now, the point about Tim Walz, right? And I was listening to an interview that he did on CNN where he says, he's a gun owner. He thinks he can shoot more pheasant than J.D. Vance. He is a guy who's got lots of, as he says, Republican friends, Republicans in his family. So he's not...
Ex-military and not an officer.
Interesting. Okay, so all these things make him, I think, feel like a very comfortable, folksy fit. I mean, a smart guy. I don't mean folksy at all in a sort of pejorative way. I mean somebody who has got the ability to just talk to normal, everyday Americans on the stump.
You know the folksiness that it reminded me of the policewoman in Fargo, where she just
carrying quite a load. Mind if I take a seat? I'm carrying quite a load.
Exactly. And North Dakota, where Fargo is just
next
across the border, next door neighbour to Minnesota.
A mere 6-hour drive, probably.
Yeah, less than that.
Yeah.
And I just kind of thought there is that easy folksiness that would be very appealing. And if the problem with Kamala Harris is that she's a bit too kind of academic, Californian liberal and woke, he's down to earth, ordinary. So I kind of think that he's someone who could play a big role.
Okay, so that's Tim Walz. Who's your next person?
Well, I suppose the other person that is still under consideration as far as we can tell, and I'll be surprised, but he's a brilliant communicator, is Pete Buttigieg. He also comes from a Rust Belt state. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, when he kind of was making this pitch for the Democratic
He's got this Mayor
nomination.
Pete nickname, hasn't he? That was
Mayor
his
Pete.
Twitter handle.
And he has also been the dispenser of a lot of the big checks from the COVID recovery plan of, rebuild the roads, rebuild the bridges, rebuild the railroads, etc. And so he is someone as well who is being watched. And he's also, he takes the argument to Fox News and seems very comfortable there.
And you said you'd be surprised because I think that's a euphemism, meaning he's a gay man and you don't think the Democrats would dare put a gay man on the same ticket as a black or an Asian woman.
I think it would be a big risk given if you're going for the Sunbelt states where there is a lot of social conservatism and blue-collar states where there's also a lot of social conservatism, of just the backlash that there could be for that.
I'm going to disagree with that because I think the one thing that Kamala Harris needs in a VP is chemistry. And I think the two of them together would be an extraordinary ticket. I think you would get people out to listen to the two of them in their droves because they sound very different. But I think that they would work together as an exciting prospect. You mentioned the Sunbelt states. We should also mention Mark Kelly, who I have sort of tried to shoehorn into every episode. And he is the former astronaut, again, former military man, married to the congresswoman who was, affected, exactly, a victim of gun violence, a survivor of gun violence. And he's got a great CV. Some people would say slightly dull. Great on paper, slightly dull, orator to listen to, but very much in the running. I think Roy Cooper from North Carolina has now ruled himself out. Yeah. And you were saying Andy Beshear as well.
From Kentucky, who is a two-time governor in Kentucky, which is a Republican red state, and has won re-election there, even though it is a state that I think Donald Trump carried in 2020 by 25 points.
Yeah, they're never going to get it.
So it is a state where, this Democrat has done really well with Republicans, and that might be appealing. But all of this underlines one central point. And again, I mentioned it earlier on. Donald Trump hates it when he is not the centre of attention. And what most people in America are talking about now is who is going to be Kamala's pick as the running mate. That's going to go on for another week. Then we're going to be talking about the convention, and then it will be the convention itself. For the next few weeks...
The convention itself will be royalty.
Yeah.
Right? Anyone, everyone, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, probably both Clintons, you will get the full-on, it will be like a sort of royal wedding.
And there'll be Hollywood royalty there, and there will be pop music royalty there. You can be sure that they're going to put on quite a show when everyone gathers in Chicago in sort of late August for that. And so there's going to be a month where Donald Trump is going to be sort of chewing the shag pile carpet at Mar-a-Lago, furious that all this attention is going to the Democrats, and the potential risk of him becoming ever more shrill to get attention from the media, which might be counterproductive.
I tell you what's interesting as well. For about the last month, no one has mentioned Donald Trump's court cases. And partly that's because the Democrats feel they've come to a dead end. First you get the Supreme Court saying he's got immunity. Then you get the special counsel Jack Smith one essentially kind of falling apart, being pushed back. There probably won't be another case anywhere near the courts before November. But I think in a way it's playing to the Democrats' strength, this, because it allows them just to concentrate on the person in front of them, right? Rather than saying, oh, don't forget this, and we've got to explain this, and he was a big danger to democracy, all of which might be true, and they might still very much believe it and want to talk about it. But in a sense, it is becoming something that is much more, I want to say, physical, sensual. This campaign now is not about the past. It's about, oh, that sounded a bit odd. Oh, that's a bit weird. It's, in a way, it's becoming more traditional, right? But it's about, when you see that guy, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you actually feel? And that's, I think, what Kamala Harris has brought to this.
Well, the one person we have not spoken about on this podcast thus far is the President of the United States of America right now, Joe Biden. And in a moment, we ought to discuss some of the interesting things that he has said about the Supreme Court, about presidential immunity, and changes that he would love to bring about.
So before we talk about these proposed changes that Joe Biden wants to make to the Supreme Court, I think it's worth hearing a little bit about Donald Trump's latest invective on the campaign, where he essentially suggests that you will not be ever voting again after this time round if you get it wrong.
To get out and vote. And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you
I don't know what that means. Does it mean that Joe Biden will fix it? No. It doesn't mean I will fix it. Does it mean that the country will be fine?
It'll be so perfect we won't need voting anymore.
We won't need voting anymore, or you won't have to vote for me again because I will have done it all in 4 years. It's very loose, shall we say, but not entirely encouraging.
Look, it's obviously been interpreted as Donald Trump saying, voting comes to an end in 4 years' time. I think that's harsh. I think it's Donald Trump playing to the crowd, trying to be the entertainer. I love you, Christians.
Yeah. Give it me one more time. He doesn't really care about the Republican Party after he's left office. That's what he's essentially saying, right?
So there's been various times when Democrats have been urging Biden to do something about the Supreme Court, and he's finally kind of said, OK, we need to do something about it.
Because they talked right at the beginning of his term about packing the court, right?
Exactly.
Packing it.
But he's now talking, instead of about packing it, he's talking about...
Packing it meaning to put in more Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Like, in British politics, Labour win an election, we're going to fill the House of Lords with Labour peers.
Exactly.
What is being suggested, though, by Joe Biden is that there ought to be term limits on how long a Supreme Court justice can stay on the court. It used to be the case in the 19th century, you would be appointed in your late 50s, you had a life expectancy of your mid to late 60s, you were there for 10 years and you were gone. But you've got Amy Coney Barrett, who was the most recent appointment to the Supreme Court, who is young, in her early 40s. She could be there for another 40, 50 years on the Supreme Court making judgments. So one of the things he's saying is, let's have fixed term limits. The other thing he's saying is that you need to overturn the Supreme Court ruling about presidential immunity so that a president can be held legally responsible for their acts when they're a president. This is all fine. The problem is it would require a constitutional amendment for that to happen, and there hasn't been a constitutional amendment passed since 1992. The 27th Amendment about House of Representatives pay.
I think his language around this has been really interesting because if you think that judges are just there to interpret the rule of law, then maybe you're not so worried about term limits in the way that you would be about political appointees. We don't in this country make judges step down, after they've served a certain amount of time on, as a High Court judge, for example, right? But Biden has talked about extremism on the court and how that's led to an erosion of public trust. And I think that's really interesting because what he's essentially said is that this body, this bench, the Supreme Court, which ought to have been above and beyond politics, has been politicised. And extremism, I think, is his way of saying it is not doing its job as an impartial body anymore. It is extreme, and that's why he's talking about a term limit.
The problem is that to get a constitutional amendment passed, it needs to have a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives and a 2/3 majority in the Senate in polarised, divided America.
Where the Democrats have the Senate but not the House.
And vice versa. The chances of that happening, I think ever, are more or less zero. Any constitutional amendment that passes now in America has to be on the most anodyne of subject. It's not going to be about term limits for the Supreme Court or overturning a Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. So, interesting speech, but honestly, Joe, it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, but interesting that he's throwing himself into these, massive sort of constitutional issues now because he's not fighting the campaign. He might as well be having a go at it. Before we go, we just want to leave you with what we're going to interpret as a sort of love letter between the former president and his wife, Melania. He was asked whether she loved him on a chat show.
What was Melania's reaction, if you don't mind my asking? I know this is very personal, when she learned about what happened on that field in Butler?
She was watching.
Oh, she was watching in real time?
She was watching live. It was all over the place. It was on television. It was on your network, but it was all over the place. And she was watching. I asked her that. I mean, I wasn't there. I was on the ground. And when the world started to, like, you could talk to people, I said, so what was your feeling? And she can't really even talk about it.
Traumatized.
Which is okay, because that means she likes me.
No, she
loves me.
That's good.
I mean, let's say she could talk about it freely. That wouldn't be. I'm not so sure which is better. But she either likes or loves me, and that's nice.
There you go. That's
She
reassuring.
she
either likes or loves me.
One of the two.
One of the two. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, as Meatloaf would say.
Yeah, it's better than Bibi Netanyahu's introduction to Trump when I went on the trip to Israel, when Trump went there, and he introduced Donald Trump by saying, Donald Trump and the first wife. You could have first lady, or you could have third wife. You couldn't have first wife.
Love it.
We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.